As entrepreneurs, we all have a reason why we chose to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to capture those stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. Dan is a former middle school science teacher turned successful realtor from Denver, Colorado. In recent years, he merged his passions for real estate, education, and leadership to build and lead an organization of top-producing real estate agents. In addition, he is the author of 2 books, a podcast host, and a public speaker. Dan has experienced burnout multiple times in his career and now teaches classes about how to prevent or overcome burnout and still have a successful business. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. And I always like to hear from realtors, having been one. I always like to hear the different versions of things. I really think there's something entrepreneurial about being a realtor in sales specifically, but just the realtor side of things. I'm really excited to hear about what you have to say and as well as what you have to say about having burned out. So thank you so much for being on the show today. And I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Anytime.
Yeah.
So you went from middle school teacher to realtor. What chain of events happened to make that transition? Like what
Yeah.
happened to get you from point A to point B?
Yeah. So, you don't get into teaching for the money, right? You
Mhm.
get into it because you have a heart for it, right? Like you want to give back, you want to help, right? And so that's why I got into education. And I taught for 7 years, middle school. I coached high school basketball. And I quickly found out that as much as I love the art of teaching, I didn't really enjoy the job. And, just being in that environment, it's very top down. You have very little control over your future, right? You just kind of go in, you punch the clock, you leave. And I just found that wasn't a good environment for me. I got frustrated really quickly. I was the kind of person that was like, this isn't right, and then I would get mad when things wouldn't change, right? And so it just wasn't a good environment for me. So I spent the last 3 years of my career in education trying to figure out what I wanted to do when I left. I knew I was leaving. I didn't know what I was going to do. I started asking like everybody I knew, what do you do for a living? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And just grilling everybody. And it wasn't until I hired a career therapist
Mhm.
to help me figure out what I needed to do. I hired her, I paid for 3 sessions up front. And then the night before I went to go see her, I had one of those waking dreams where I was like, real estate, duh. Like, how have I not figured this out yet? Right. And so it
Yeah.
was just kind of one of those moments. I walked into her office and I'm like, listen, I know I prepaid for these, but I think I figured it out. And she's like, okay.
Cool. It's all good.
Cool. All right. So yes, and then the rest is history, I guess, as they say, right?
Yeah. So truly the entrepreneurial journey. And I think a lot of us, like I felt like that in my 9 to 5, where it's like, no, this isn't right. Let's go. I wanted to create, and they were very much into having a worker.
Yeah.
And so I would try to push this here and it wouldn't, nope, push back on it wasn't going to happen. And especially like you said, in the teaching world, that is a huge deal. It's very, very militaristic. So I think your story is going to resonate with a lot of different people. And I like how you said that you had that one moment, because I think we all have that moment of, duh, that makes sense.
Right.
And then you feel stupid for a second, and then for like 12 seconds, and then you want to do what you need to do, and you get this flash of inspiration and those download moments. I love those.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
and going back to what you were saying about the creativity piece, that's
Yeah.
actually what I really enjoyed too.
Yeah.
I taught science, uh, earth science and physical science, and
Okay.
so lots of opportunities to be active and do
Mhm.
kinesthetic learning, and so I loved that. That's when I was in my zone. I'd be like, okay, we got to teach weather. How do I make this fun and interesting for the kids? And I came up with these big multi-week projects and all this kind of stuff, and I love that stuff. And I think one of the big disappointments for me was I didn't feel like there was a lot of room for growth. So I
Mhm.
had these ideas, I'd build these things, I'd give them to other teachers, they wouldn't implement them. And I'm just like, man, I feel like I'm spinning my wheels here. Like I feel like my creative side is being stifled. I need to go somewhere where I can, really expand.
Yeah. And real estate is that, specifically being a realtor. I think a lot of people have taken that path. I see in my industry in instructional design, a lot of teachers are going into instructional design because it's right in their wheelhouse, but they feel like they can expand beyond that. So what was what was that transition like to a realtor? Like after you get your course, there's it's hard to get up and started. What was that transition?
Well, so I talk about this whole story at length in one of my books that I wrote, but
Mhm.
it's like I didn't do it in the best way possible. Let's just put it that way. My son was born. He was maybe 6 months old when I no longer had a salary.
Mhm.
I started doing fix and flips, so I was an unlicensed, just doing fix and flips and investing. And the money that I got to do the fix and flips came from my in-laws.
Mhm.
So unemployed, new father, doing fix and flips on a loan from my in-laws. Wouldn't recommend that. So it was tough. It was really tough. There was a lot of pressure, a lot
Yeah.
of stress. I did about a dozen of them. I got licensed about a year in, and then sort of the first 3 4 years, that's all I was doing was investing, and had some big wins, had a couple losses, and when it was all said and done, when you factor in living expenses and everything else, like that money that was given to me was gone, and
Mhm.
so I had to have this conversation with my in-laws, like, hey, thanks for the money, it's gone. And then I transitioned into real estate sales at that point,
Yeah.
and I thought that it was going to be quick and easy. I'm like, hey, everybody knows I'm in real estate, but they didn't know that I could help them buy and sell. They just knew I was in the field. They had no idea what it meant. And so it took another 2 years to really kind of get some momentum going with my real estate business. And so you're talking 5 years of exceptionally lean, uh, tons of stress. It put me into a pretty deep depression, to the point that I was, even contemplating taking my life. Like it was not a good situation. It was exceptionally difficult, really challenging. There's better ways to do it than how I did it. But at the same time, you know, those those 5 years when they led me to the lowest moment in my life,
Yeah.
which was the springboard to all the growth and everything that I've accomplished since then. And
Yeah.
so, it sounds like a really shitty story, but really, that's what had to happen for me
Yeah.
to get my butt in gear and be like, hey, how about you just do something to fix your situation? And at that point, I was like, all right, that's it. Like, I'm not going down this path anymore. I'm not hanging out in the doldrums anymore. Like, what am I going to do about it? And that was the fuel that really launched me forward from there.
And I think entrepreneur is the ultimate tough love therapy. If you come
Right.
in with something, you're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
you know, and when you said, it probably wasn't the best way to do it, but that was the way you needed to do it. Trust me, I have screwed up way more things than I've done right, like a lot more, probably 100-to-1 ratio there.
Right.
But for me, it was also that learning process. We were talking earlier about, how as entrepreneurs, we're like, let's push this button and see what happens. And it might blow up in our face.
Right.
But
Right.
it's that learning process. And I think a lot of people don't, when they see an entrepreneur and they see these people that like Bezos or Musk or all these folks, what they think of as arrogance is really just we've been kicked in the gut and stood back up so many times and say, no, I'm not done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that resiliency piece.
Yeah.
And resiliency, one of the reasons teachers do really well in real estate, by the way, is most of them are pretty resilient and resourceful, which is a great trait to have in real estate. But it really is that ability to get knocked down, stand back up, get knocked down, stand back up, because resiliency is only built through trial and error. You
Yeah.
don't get it by winning, 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 winning. That doesn't build resiliency. That
Yeah.
builds complacency. So you've got to do it wrong. You got to screw it up. You got to be willing to take that risk, knowing that sometimes it's going to fail, and
Mhm.
knowing that that's part of the process, and knowing that's actually a good thing
Yeah.
as long as you frame it that way in your own mind.
Yeah. For me, it's one of the things entrepreneurship has taught me is no matter what happens in my life, I will figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah.
Period. No matter what.
Yeah.
Except maybe a nuclear war, and I don't think any one of us are getting out of that. But
Dig a hole. I don't know.
I've seen friends have $250,000 tax bills they had to take care of. I've seen folks who have went bankrupt with 70 million, $70 million companies bankrupt in a week. I've seen all of these things, and I think that's one thing that as entrepreneurs that we do is we know how to handle this,
Right.
But you bring up a really interesting thing, and that is burnout. And I think as entrepreneurs, we're really prone to this, where you said that you ended up in depression because it wasn't going, you're in what I call the suck. And the good stuff's on the other side of that suck. This is part of that process. Talk to me a little bit more about your burnout and what happened there.
Yeah. So kind of continuing that journey, right? So I was at my lowest moment and I said, that's it. Like I got to do something about this. And so at that point, I really leaned into whatever it takes. I have got to prove to myself or to them, whoever them is, that I can do this, that I'm not a loser, that I can actually succeed at a high level. And so that was the driving force that pushed me forward. There's always a double edge to the sword, right? So I got to the point where I'm top 1% in Denver. I got to the point where I'm making really good money. I got to the point where, we bought our dream house. I got all those things. And then by the end of 2020, I was fried, just fried. I just couldn't do it anymore. I would come in, I'd be in my office all day long. I'd go out for dinner, say hi to the kids, go back into my office, keep working all night. And I just got to the point where I was like, I had kind of proven the point.
Mm-hmm.
And so the juice wasn't worth the squeeze anymore. And so now I'm in this position where it's like, I've got this really great business. It's making me really good money, but I don't want to do this anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to grind this hard for the rest of my life. Like, how do I transition? And so, um, you know, so at that point, I would call it like burnout, where I just wanted to run and hide and just like walk away from it. And I was actually on my way out of real estate altogether, because I was going to become a speaker and an author and a coach and just do that full time
Mm-hmm.
until I found the company that I'm currently with, EXP, which is really team friendly. And
Yeah.
so it gave me the platform to be able to start to grow a team and get back to my roots, which is teaching. And so
Yeah.
now I get to teach, but I get to teach about the thing that I know really well, which is real estate,
Yeah.
and mindset. And so I have this opportunity to bring these two things together now, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I'll say about burnout with it is when I burned out in 2020, that was completely fried, frazzled. Like, don't talk to me. I need to just go sit in a dark room for a little while because I'm overstimulated, right? I'm
Yep.
out. And that's ultimately what led to my trip to Costa Rica too. I ended up spending 6 weeks in Costa Rica with my family, and
Mm-hmm.
that was I just got to get out of town, get out of Dodge, and not do anything for 6 weeks. And it was probably one of the healthiest things I've ever done. It took 3 weeks for me to just decompress to the point that I could get a really good night's sleep and all that kind of stuff. So I was pretty fried. When I came back from Costa Rica, I am grinding. I am hustling right now. I'm trying to grow the team. I'm trying to support the team. I'm still in sales. So I'm doing all of these things. And so when I came back from Costa Rica, I kind of decided I was going to do this little experiment with myself. Can I hustle and grind and get after it and have a healthy mindset while I do it?
Mm-hmm.
So lean into the pain, lean into what is, and be grateful for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, it's all about just shifting my mindset. So I'm still working really hard right now, not as hard as I was in 2020. I decided I don't want to work that hard for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
right? So I've set some parameters, but I've also really shifted my mindset around what it means to hustle and grind and how I want to show up in my life every single day, whether I'm working hard or relaxing.
Mm-hmm. And I think, there is a part of what we do where we have to hustle and grind. We've got to do that thing. But like you said, that it's a different balance. And I think one of the things I wish there was more said on is the different life balance that entrepreneurs have. Like we've got a different work-life balance. It's not what most people think of. And go into a little bit about how you balance it. Like how do you balance that in an entrepreneurial context versus what you would do with, you go to school, you get back in a certain amount of time, you do this, you do this. Like how do
Yeah.
you balance it? Like what are some of the
Yeah.
key points that you have?
So the way that I describe it is imagine that you've got a like a pendulum, right?
Mhm.
And tips like this, right? On one side,
Mhm.
you've got burnout, and on the other side, I guess you could call it complacency,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So if you're totally complacent, this thing's going to fall off, right? If
Mhm.
totally burned out, this thing's going to fall off, right? So balance, some might say, well, that means you're standing right in the middle.
Mhm.
Well, that's impossible.
Yeah.
It's just impossible, especially for an entrepreneur. So the way I see balance is it's actually the movement intentionally from one side to the other. So think about like a person bouncing on a rope, right? They go this way a little bit, they go this way a little bit, they go this way a little bit, and ultimately it equals balance.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the way that I see it is balancing on this fulcrum. It's like sometimes I got to grind towards the burnout side, sometimes I got to relax and go to Costa Rica. And then recognizing where you're at and being very present and intentional about how you're showing up, where you're at. And if you don't like where you're at, no problem. What adjustments are you going to make about it? Right. And so, how do you, it's just that constant act of balancing versus having balance.
Mhm. And that makes complete sense. I know for me, it's like there's certain boundaries I have where it's I work 6 days a week, 1 day's off to me, and I won't work past 9 p.m. I just, that's a boundary because I need my sleep and that sort of thing. And it was kind of I understand what you mean when you say sometimes you have this moment where you're just grinding and you go and your sales calls, you do these things, you do all this stuff. And for me, I've also noticed there's times when I just need to back off. So that one day that I never actually take a day off. So that seventh day, that last day, is often I call them staff development days to go back to your teaching. Where it's, let me do the cool stuff that I want to do. Let me recharge my batteries. Let me go see what I can do. And I make sure there's enough of that. So I guess it's the, similar thing where I wouldn't say complacency, but it's more being internal, kind of being taking the foot off the gas a little bit and saying, okay, let me get into, I don't want to say this, let me get into visionary mode. Let me just go
Right.
see what the high level vision is going to be. Let me go do the cool stuff that I put off. Let me go see, get into
Yep.
that creative mode. And I think that's a big thing. Yeah.
And that's so important. That was actually one of my really big takeaways too from Costa Rica is I realized I never slow down enough to
Mm.
just think.
Yeah.
There are so many high level producers in all sorts of different industries that all do that. They
Yeah.
intentionally take time to just think. And it seems like a waste of time, at least for me. It,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like a waste of time. And I have to like, go, no, this is not a waste of time. This is very productive. Shut up and think.
Yep.
Do it. And
Yeah.
then something always comes up, you know?
I've had that too, where I've burned myself out, where I just grind, 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 grind. And and that's part of the reason the podcast came around is that, there's a passion within us and it's understanding what that passion is and how to do it. And sometimes that passion means step back. When you see a visionary in visionary mode, it is one of the most magical things, at least for me to watch, is because they get that little glint in their eye and you can tell you're locked in for about 4 hours of just mind dump.
Yeah. Right.
But it's fun to watch that passion and being able to balance that out with doing what you need to do to keep your company going. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Especially when you're in that moment like you were at first, where you're like, I don't have a choice. I've burned my bridges. I need to make this work.
Right. Yeah. There's no option.
Yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
I'm still in that place, right? Because I'm in that transition where my sales have really gone down
Yeah.
just because that's not what I'm really pursuing heavily. So it's all
Mhm.
just referrals, what referrals are coming in, right? So it's passive.
Mhm.
But then I'm working on growing the team and supporting the team and all that kind of stuff, but that hasn't really gone to the next level yet, and so I'm kind of still in that space where I'm like, I got to figure this out. There's no, we'll see what happens. It's like, I got to figure this out.
There's that transition. Yep, absolutely. And those transitions can be a little difficult, and it's that moment where you're just kind of white knuckle for a hot second. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But usually that's the good stuff. I always like to say, embrace the suck. I think I read that
Yeah.
in David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me. Embrace the suck. The good stuff's on the other side of it. So
Yeah.
absolutely. So now, as far as your teams are concerned, I know there's a lot of real estate, and Denver has been a hot real estate for 20 some odd years. It's been a
Right.
while.
Yeah.
Ever since I started. So to give you a little history, I started going to Denver when Lodo was being built up. So that probably was like 25 years ago, something like that,
Right.
20 years ago,
Yeah.
when I first learned about Denver. And even then, it was still pretty big. What are some of the lessons that you have learned from real estate specifically in a hot market that's been a hot market for a long time?
Yeah, good question. Well, so right now I wouldn't say it is a hot market.
Okay.
Right now specifically, uh it's still considered a seller's market, but it feels more like a buyer's market. It's fairly flat right now, I guess you'd say. And so getting into real estate in 2011, um, that was or it was already starting on the uptick from the 2008 crash.
Yeah.
So it's been an upward momentum my entire career. And it just kind of felt like this is real estate.
Mm-hmm.
This is my first experience of, oh man, like things are slow. Like what do we do here? How do we make sure that we're adding more value? Like what do we need to adjust? When do we, and so um, I think one of the things that I've learned from real estate is that nothing's permanent.
Yeah.
It's always going to change, and as a team leader too, right? We've got all these new things coming in from NAR and all this kind of stuff, and so they get all worked up and, oh my God, this guy is falling, and I'm like, relax. It's just this, and this, and we're good, And so, like, finding ways to be more level-headed, not as high on the highs, not as low on the lows, and more just kind of like, yep, the highs happen, the lows happen, and it's all part of the journey. So real estate has been a really good vehicle for helping me understand how to navigate that so that I don't get too beat down or too excited and complacent. It kind of keeps me even keeled. And well, I had another thought, but
That's
not.
okay. Well, it goes back to something that was, the only permanent thing is impermanence, and learning how to kind of jive with it and say, okay, great. Well, now we're a buyer's market. What are we going to do, and how are we going to move in that? And I think real estate is a really good educator as far as the only permanent thing is impermanence.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that I was saying was the psychological perspective. So when I was in education, I was kind of aware, but not really. But for me, it was a giant social experiment. I loved getting to know the kids. And then when parent teacher conferences would happen, I'd put the pieces together and I'm like, got it.
That makes
Okay.
sense now.
And so I was constantly learning, right, about how to be a better parent and that kind of thing, just almost subconsciously. And then when I got into real estate, I realized how many gaps I had in things. Like I was coaching high school basketball. I didn't know how to lead at all. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have known this stuff when I was coaching. But so I started learning all of these things about how to lead, how to communicate, how to negotiate, all of these kinds of things that I started learning and reading all these books about. And one thing that I love about real estate that it has done for me is it has forced me to become really good at understanding people, understanding their emotions, understanding how to communicate better, how to get somebody to see your side of things and have a proper negotiation over an argument. And so it's really motivated me to learn a lot about humanity, and that's really helped me with my journey moving forward. And so that's probably one of the coolest things, that and building relationships with my friends who I get to work with. Those are some of the coolest things I think I've gotten out of real estate.
I 100% resonate with that. I can remember one specific client that I had a long time ago as a realtor, and they had they sent me like a 6-page bullet point. This is what I want. This is exactly what we want in a house. In an area with an average age of like 60, 70 years are the new buildings, and the old buildings are 200. So, um, and so I was a new realtor. So of course they gave me the difficult clients, and then
Right.
they decided to go with a house that was completely different. There wasn't a single check mark. You
Yep.
don't make decisions, you don't make decisions logically, you do it emotionally.
Yep. Exactly. Been there, done that. Yeah.
It was one of those moments where you had to be really good with people and have a really good poker face, because I'm like, what did you do?
Right. You're still full of crap. No.
Yeah, yeah. Thankfully, the filters were super strong. So,
Right. Right.
yeah. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the podcast today, and I do have one question that I ask every person so we can give back to the audience, and that is, what is one book or podcast that has had a significant impact on your life?
Man, it's a really tough question because, like I said, I love to read, and I do Audible, right? So
Yep.
everywhere I drive, I'm listening to Audible. Um, so I would say probably the podcast that has had the biggest impact on my life in the last year would be Ed Milet's
Mm-hmm.
podcast.
Yep.
He's got such an interesting story,
Yeah.
kind of being the go get your jet guy, the 10X. It's all about the jet and the car and all that kind of stuff,
Yep.
to more of a position where, yeah, that stuff great, but
Mm-hmm.
what's your quality of life look like, and what do you really want, and that kind of thing. And so he has really cool guests come on. They speak about everything from mindset to business to, I mean, they talk about lots of different things. And so there's actually been quite a few books that I've gotten off of that podcast that I've listened to. Super Communicators is one that's really, really good.
Hmm.
But anyway, yeah. So I've gotten a lot from him. I actually got to meet him here in Denver when he came out here to Denver to speak, and gave him a copy of my book, which was pretty cool. And
Awesome.
so yeah, Ed Milet's got some good stuff.
He is a really, really cool person. I met him at an event probably about 4 years ago in LA that when I was at with one of my clients, and just genuinely good guy. I have a great amount of respect for him for a lot of reasons. He's also a great storyteller. So I
Yeah,
always like a good storyteller. So yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah. Eventually, I'm going to get more and more and more into speaking. I do some speaking now, but as I get further down that, like one of the things I love about Ed Milet, like when I watch him,
Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm like I'm like watching him. I'm like,
Yep.
what's he doing there? And, okay, he walked over here and he did this and he did that. And like he's really good at captivating the audience and getting people engaged and telling stories and all that kind of stuff. So I've learned a lot from him just from that too.
And one of the things he does is he tells personal stories. And what ends up happening, these are the things when you're a storyteller and your mom was a psychologist, stuff like this. Uh, when you tell a story, we've got our brains are wired emotionally. And so and they have found about 15 years ago, they did a study and took a bunch of people under fMRI machines and tried to see where the brain was working. And they found cells that go throughout the entire brain, left side, right side, whatever it is. And they're triggered by emotion, specifically storytelling. So if I tell you a story, a personal story, and there's some vulnerability involved, what ends up happening is the people that you're talking to, so these neurons are ignited, and the people you're talking to and your brain waves sync. And that's what that moment is when you're listening to a story, and things could be happening outside of you and you're really focused in on the story. It literally creates a mastermind.
Huh.
And Ed is really good at this.
That's,
Like really good at
well,
this.
yeah, I've
Yeah.
never heard it formulated that way. That's really good.
We hear about the power of stories, and I think we only understand a small portion of how really powerful they are.
Yeah,
We're wired for them. So, yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate having you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Dan, check out the link in the description.